Started with today's Perfect. We're going to get started with today's presentation. As you just saw, we are recording today's conversation in hopes that you can utilize this as a resource at a later date, as well as for our colleagues that are unable to join us today who are going through the action planning process. We're gathered here today with the All in Campus Democracy Challenge and our colleagues with the Voter Friendly Campus Program, NASPA, and the Campus Vote Project to share some tips and tricks and best practices related to action planning, as well as to provide a space for some brainstorming amongst our colleagues to ensure we're prepared for the May 31st action planning deadline. As we go through today's conversation, we do want to encourage everyone to add in any questions or comments in the chat function at any time. This will allow us to go ahead and respond to you either individually or directly, depending upon the nature of the question or comment provided. As we go through today's conversation, it'll be great to hear from you all as we're engaging in the action planning process to make sure that your needs are met throughout today's conversation. So please don't be shy about adding questions and comments throughout today's conversation. The other piece for accessibility I just want to note is that within the Zoom platform, you do have the option to use live transcript or closed captioning on your individual Zoom screen. When you do so, just click on the 3-dot ellipse at the bottom of your Zoom screen and click on the live caption button, and this will capture the content as appropriately as possible. To guide us through today's conversation, each of our presenters will go ahead and introduce themselves at their moments of speaking. With that said, I will say that I'm Stephanie King and I'm here with the All In program, and I'm delighted to spend some time with you all. On the next slide, you'll see that for our focus today, what we're hoping to do is to not only do introductions of all of our speakers, as well as those that are in the room by typing in the chat. We have some updates from the Department of Education with the Dear Colleague letter that came out last week. We're going to hear from our colleagues at Northampton Community College in PA and Virginia Wesleyan University. And then, of course, we're going to have some breakout group conversations. So with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague Mike to introduce himself and to share some updates from the Department of Education. Mike?
Hey y'all, this is Mike Burns with the Fair Election Center's Campus Vote Project. Really appreciate everybody being here today for our second action planning webinar in a row with our friends at All In. So really quick reminder, I know it's been, it feels like the beginning of this year has just flown by already, but you know, we're in a midterm election year. We have the joint campus plan deadline coming up for both the All In program and for the Voter Friendly Campus program on May 31st. So hopefully you can use all the great information you learned here today to really spruce up and work on finishing those action plans in the next month to be able to submit those for that deadline. And you can see here the instructions on this, and we'll send this out with the slides and the recording afterwards to everyone as well. But for submitting action plans to All In, you can send them to actionplans@civicnation.org. It's that email address, and there's a form that you can use to upload your action plan for the Voter Friendly Campus program. And then just so that folks know, we encourage people, you only need to write one plan to participate in either or both programs, and we will actually be working on the back end jointly together to review all of the action plans that we receive using the Strengthening American Democracy Guide rubric. To provide folks some feedback, to provide you a score and some written feedback to all the plans that we get together to try and make that as seamless as possible for folks to be able to participate in both programs on our end. So just really quick, some exciting news. The Department of Education just sent out last week a Dear Colleague letter on this topic, so we wanted to take some quick time to revisit it today. Before we hear from our great speakers, some fantastic action plan award winners from the 2020 cycle. So the Higher Education Act has a voter registration requirement in it that basically says if your institution is a covered institution, which is the vast majority of campuses in the country, you must make voter registration forms widely available to your students and distribute the forms individually to your degree or certificate program students who are physically in attendance at your institution. There's some language that the department generally references about making a good faith effort for this, in addition to making them widely available, in addition to giving them individually to students. This has been in the bill for quite some time. It's part of it's buried in like the grant agreements for being able to receive federal aid dollars. So interestingly enough, like if your department hears about it or you've heard about this on campus, it might have actually come from like your financial aid office or one of those folks on campus. So some quick history, the language that's in there, it's sort of modeled off the National Voter Registration Act, which was from 1993, which basically embedded voter registration into departments of motor vehicles and other state agencies and built out a process federally that the states had to comply with to handle that. And then basically in the 1998 reauthorization of the Higher Education Act, they added in that language we were just looking at on the last slide, kind of modeling it off the NVRA model, except instead of having to actually provide assistance and then transmit the forms on behalf of students, it's kind of just that first step that the HEA takes. So you have to distribute the forms, but you're not mandated to provide assistance or turn them in. Although there are some states like New York that has actually designated their campuses under the NVRA. So those campuses have to actually do the full suite of things, provide the forms, provide assistance, and transmit them on behalf of folks who complete them if they would like. So in 2008, the bill was updated again to allow for the distribution of those registration forms electronically, but only in a message that contains a link or the ability to download the form, and it has to solely be about voter registration. So you don't have to give out paper forms anymore, but if you are going to do it this way, you can't bury it in like your welcome to campus newsletter with 50 other things as folks are going through orientation. It has to be in a communication just about this topic. So in 2013 was the last time the department actually said something about this. So they sent out a Dear Colleague letter at that time, reminding campuses about this voter registration requirement in the Higher Education Act, and kind of reminding folks about what the update meant on electronic distribution and this language around solely focused on. So it's been a while that this has been in place, but it's also been a pretty long time since the department actually communicated this to campuses. So some folks might not have heard this before. So we're really excited that they sent out this letter last week. So here you can see the letter they sent out last week. The president actually issued an executive order focused on expanding access to voter registration and election administration, and it was across the board. And it basically directed every agency to come up with a plan for how they were going to go about this. And part of the Department of Ed's plan that they agreed to was, one, they would do this work around the Dear Colleague letter to make sure that folks knew about this voter registration requirement that campuses have to comply with, as well as a number of other key things. And I just wanted to flag that for folks in this context here about the letter, because there's also some other follow-up steps that the department's been considering, some of them short-term, some of them long-term. One commitment that the department has made under this is to actually put out like a toolkit of resources to help institutions understand how to best go about doing voter registration on campus, as well as also getting accurate election information out to students. Hopefully that will be finished before this year's fall elections in time for folks to actually put that toolkit to good use. We'll see how it goes. Some folks from the Students Learn Students Vote Coalition, including ourselves and All In, have been talking to the Department of Education about a lot of the existing resources that we've worked with a lot of you over the last few years to build out that they could consider including or building off of for that. So hopefully we'll have some more coming out of this executive order and even kind of what's beyond what's mentioned today. But you go to the next slide. Just some other quick things that are in the letter. It's really exciting, and we'll talk about this first point a little bit later too. So really excited that they shared this with folks. The letter clarifies that work-study funds can be used to support student positions, even in conducting voter registration. I think this is really important because there is a general prohibition against federal work-study funds being used for any political activity, whether it's partisan or nonpartisan, but that actually only applies to positions that are with an organization external to the institution. So if you're with a federal, state, local government agency, or you're with like an external nonpartisan group, you still can't do political activity, even if it's nonpartisan. But if it is if it's an institution position, even with federal work-study funds, they can engage in those types of activities as long as they're nonpartisan. So they can do things like letting their peers know about the upcoming elections, doing voter registration drives on campus. And then the letter also goes on to encourage campuses to both consider ways that they can encourage members of their staff, faculty, and students to serve as poll workers, which I just think is like really great. We saw a lot of great work around this, especially in 2020 when there was a real need to try and recruit, the average age of poll workers, according to the EAC, I think is like 65. I haven't seen the update to see what their survey from 2020 actually said, because I'm sure maybe it finally came down for the first time in like my whole life. Every year I check it and it goes up for the last 8 years. 2020 might be the first year that it went down. So trying to think about like, how do we get folks from a community who might be more familiar with the types of documents or the address locations that folks might live with to be the ones who are meeting them in polling places, making them feel more comfortable, helping, especially with students, maybe a newer group of people through the voting process. is really important. So glad that they included that in there. And then the last point was just thinking about how institutions can also work with local election officials to utilize campus facilities and spaces to provide access to voting directly to through things like hosting drop boxes, early voting sites, and even polling places for election day. So some really great content in there, some links out to some other places around serving as poll workers or how to find out who your local election officials are within that letter, in addition to both reminding folks about their existing requirement and their ability to use federal work study positions to help do this type of voter registration work on campus. Any questions on that before I move to our first great speaker? Awesome. This is a good group of pros. So I'm sure everybody was really probably already all up to speed on all that stuff, but we really appreciate the department using the giant megaphone they have to try and make sure that more folks are aware of that. Well, in that case, I am super excited to turn it over to Natalie from Northampton Community College, a winner of a 2022 Best Action Plan Award from our friends at All In, to talk about some points from their plan.
Hello, everyone. I am Natalie Sabrinsky. I am the program coordinator at Northampton Community College's Center for Civic and Community Engagement, and we serve as a clearinghouse for the institution's civic and community engagement on campus. So we can go to the next slide. I wanted to do, at the next slide, I just wanted to kind of do an overview of what Northampton Community College is and kind of some key bullet points. We have about 20,000 students a year come to campus. 12,000 of those are enrolled in credit programs. We also have career programs and continuing education that goes on campus. 63% of our students are first generation, 54% receive financial aid, almost 80% of our students work. One thing that's unique about our campus for a community college is we have on-campus housing, dorms, so that gives us a unique way to interact with students for voting. And then we also have a rather large international population for a community college. We have a couple partnerships with federal programs to help bring students to campus. So that's kind of the frame. Oh, and then we also have 3 campuses in Northampton County that we try to serve. Our office is located in the main campus in Bethlehem. We also have one in Monroe, and we have a satellite campus in another area of Bethlehem as well. So we try to spread our programming across all 3 campuses. Okay, next slide. So I wasn't super clear on my assignment other than to talk about our democratic engagement plan. And I kind of wanted to just focus on some quick key points of things that kind of made us nervous when we first started going through this process. So it's not going to be a huge overview of everything we're doing, but some key points or ideas or things to remember. And the big idea here is to leverage existing resources. So those of you who think you're starting from scratch, you're not really starting from scratch. There's a lot of stuff already going on your institution. And the purpose of these plans isn't to start new programs, it's to organize existing, start a little bit new, but also to organize and kind of form coalitions of individuals on campus to just kind of get a general feel for what's happening so that we can begin to measure and manage those initiatives and see their impacts. So the big thing to remember is leverage existing resources. So community partners, as a community college, we have a lot of people coming to campus. We have the League of Women Voters who come to campus. So we include them in our they're running our voter registration. So they're included in our democratic, our plan. And we don't actually have to do any additional work. We just have to kind of keep track of their coming and maybe do a little extra outreach to them to kind of make sure that it doesn't fall through the cracks. And by including them in our plan, we know that they'll continue to come back to campus semester after semester, even if the person who was their main contact point happens to transition into another role. We also try to leverage a lot of all of these great national programs, the Andrew Goodman Foundation, All In, Students Learn, Start, and Vote. They have a lot of resources available, and you can use them, as well as even just building a relationship with those organizations can be part of your action plan. The Strengthening American Democracy Guide, that gives you an outline. It was extremely helpful for us because it's basically, you can just type in the questions, and it's basically a booklet of questions for each of the chapters. And then you go through and answer those and help brainstorm. And on that, when you submit your document for review, it is one of the most friendly review processes that I've ever had. They're like, great job on this. It's like, excellent work here. Did you consider maybe possibly including these types of comments? So I would not worry about getting everything perfect, but just start. If you're new to the process, just get as much as you can down, and having a fresh set of eyes, especially, I know a lot of times the coalitions start with one person. And so that goes to leveraging these outside resources. Even if you are the only person on your campus charged with this, you are not alone in this process. There are so many external resources through these national organizations that are sit down and talk with you. So make sure to utilize those resources. And then the next one was leadership. So you could have a committee of one, but I think if you look on campus, you'll find other individuals doing, maybe in the political science department, maybe there's student clubs or organizations that are already interested in engagement opportunities. We here at our center and take a very broad view of civic engagement. We kind of look to like cookies to lure people in. So a lot of our students kind of get turned off from the democratic process and voting. They're like, we're not political. But a lot of those same students will still attend a talk on women in the wage gap and then be like, oh, that's really interesting. What can we do about it? And we can say, well, you can vote. So trying to pick, so we also include activities like that. Not everything has to be directly related to voting. And I think it's been really helpful on our campus to make sure to keep that broad definition. The same thing with like campus commitments. There's a lot of existing initiatives and degree programs. As far as like curriculum, we haven't yet actually done a very specific curriculum integration, but we do like to highlight the degree programs that exist on campus that are politically engaged. So that's something that you can include even if you're not having that initiative. It's something that still should get included in the plan. And that also helps to trigger for like, once you get settled into a position, it helps to trigger like future relationships. Oh, I should be really reaching out to this department, or it's kind of like a research project to figure out where the scope are and who you can kind of reach out to build your coalitions. And as far like the existing resources, it's assessments too. It can be as simple as just attendance tracking of your events. Don't get overwhelmed by this process. We send out, include a couple questions. I know every year, a lot of campuses will send out annual student surveys. So we include a couple civic-minded questions and integrate that into a process that already exists. And then the NSLVE is a really simple process, and they go through and figure out a lot of data to get included to help track and manage. So there's all these things that already exist. It's just kind of fishing expedition. And then our job is to kind of put them into a central location. Next slide. I'll go quicker on the next one. Alternative resources. I have to remember why. Money is the other like big focus of our organization. Our department has a really limited budget. Resources can be finances and also can be man hours. So how do we get things done on campus given small budgets and low man hours? Our community partners, once again, we work a lot with, we have a state organization that's into nonpartisan voter registration that we partner with in PA to come to campus and help with voter registration. And a lot of times we'll pair a student worker with someone from these organizations to help with the training process. And that's like a really good professional development opportunity for our students, the League of Women Voters. So they're coming in and helping support with man hours, democratic engagement organizations to help with editing plans and also coming up with ideas and things to do. We also look a lot to co-sponsors. So if there's already a student club on campus, how can we just show up to their meeting and hand out voter registrations? Or if we know that we have a student club that's really interested in climate change, so they're already putting on these events. So then our job is just to kind of elevate their voices and not necessarily do the program planning. And then work study is another great way that we try to find alternative resources. It's not coming out of our budget. You can optimize your pay for your students through the application process. We have a good relationship with our work study office, and we sit down with them and say, how can we word this differently to make sure that there's a range of salaries for starting as low as I think $8.25 an hour, and you can go up to like 10 to 15 an hour depending on the wording and the description of your activities. So use that department, utilize their resources to help change the wording and to make sure that you're getting your students a high rate. We also try to partner with national organizations. There's a lot of fellowships to supplement those wages for our students so that they can be involved in this co-curricular activity. It's difficult for a lot of community college students to commit to making low wages. So we try to make sure that we can compensate them for the work and effort that they're doing so that they don't have to make that choice between a co-curricular engagement and professional development opportunity and finances. And then that also helps, the work study program also helps to have student-led initiatives, which can increase student participation instead of like a build it and they will come model. Kind of reach out to the students and see what they need or they're already interested in and already doing, and then just support and elevate their voices. So you're not kind of starting from scratch. It's a way to leverage the resources that already exist on campus. Okay, next slide. Changes and improvements, things that I would like to see happen or be different moving forward. We struggle with student leadership. It's one of the comments in our review is getting more students involved in the programming and planning. And it's something that I agree with. It's hard at a community college with a lot of transition students on campus. They're only on campus for the one semester or things come up in life. So our work study program is helping with that. And then we're trying to reach out more to the existing student organizations and student leaders on campus to leverage their political capital and helping engage students. Maintaining momentum. So this is going to be our second submission. And so our first submission, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit to pick off the vines. So how do we scale that and institutionalize initiatives instead of just being an individual? And I don't have answers to these yet. So, but they're things that we're thinking about. And I think these are things you actually don't need to think about with your first plan. But because we have that plan, it's allowing us to move on to the next level and data-driven decisions. And it's helping us move forward with our initiatives. And then assessment is another thing that we struggle with on our campus that's specific and measurable. There's a lot of transition of students, so it's hard to know when we do measure things. Is it just the next wave of students? Are we missing that window for the students we outreach to and the new students coming to campus? Is just attendance a specific enough measurement, or do we need to start to come up with ways to measure the impact and make sure we're having high impact events? And I think that's something that a lot of college programs struggle with. But it's very exciting that we're moving on to the next phase of our planning and being able to look towards these issues. Okay, that's all I got. Questions? We're moving on.
No, that was amazing, Natalie. I really appreciate it. That was really helpful. And I think hopefully folks were able to learn a lot from that. I really appreciated hearing it. So
my two takeaways are: don't be overwhelmed. A lot of stuff already exists on campus. Just kind of collect it.
Awesome. Yeah, I appreciate your point on like really working with the other experts too, even on the federal work study positions. Like even if that's something that there's someone on your institution who is the expert in that, and working with you to make sure that it works for what you're hoping to get out of it, I think is a great idea. And I think maybe one of the follow-up things we'll see from the Department of Ed too is there used to be, I think it was like a mandatory 7% of federal work study that each institution uses. It's supposed to go to civic engagement. And that's been waived during the pandemic, but I believe that that's coming to an end as well. So really making sure that like if there's a requirement to do that, that those dollars aren't being missed, and that there are students who are able to take advantage of them for sure. Awesome. Well, really appreciate that. I think Natalie hopefully will be with us. We're going to do some breakouts in a little bit, but really excited to have our second speaker joining us, Brian, talking about Virginia Wesleyan University, another, maybe you guys are picking up on the theme here, 2020 Action Plan winner from the All-In Award ceremony from this past fall. So thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Mike. If you want to go ahead and move to the first slide, please. So Virginia Wesleyan is a private liberal arts institution. We have around 1,500 students. That includes graduate students. 42% are identified as students of color, which shocks a lot of people, but we are a very diverse campus. 31% are first generation. We have about 15% identify as non-binary, and we have about, I want to say it's 7% identify as trans. So very diverse campus located in Virginia Beach, which it's been very interesting where that is. So if you want to go ahead and move to the next slide, please. One of the things that I want to begin with, which is, and Natalie touched on it, which is I'd say probably 99% of our time, we would love to have more funds. We really would, but our funds are short. And at least in the Commonwealth of Virginia, community engagement and civic engagement, community engagement has been cut at institutions. And oftentimes these two are most like are tied together. So our budgets have been cut. And for those individuals who are just new in their position, I think there is someone from Michigan Tech who's new up in the UP. In terms of it, don't be afraid when you look at your budget and you're like, oh God, how can I do this? It seems daunting, but it can be done. Literally, the budget for Wesleyan Engaged is $10,000. That's it. That's all I get. And that has to be split between community engagement and civic engagement. And so you build upon the resources. So in terms of the on-campus connections, when I was building this plan, I started thinking about, and our campus is small, where literally you can walk from one side of the campus to the other in like 7 minutes. But in terms of it, I started thinking about, let's think about the life cycle of a student. One, orientation office, the admissions to orientation. So I work with them. So anytime stuff comes out or goes out to them, especially when they are accepted, in the acceptance letter, in the acceptance information, it actually states, hey, in the Commonwealth of Virginia, you can vote on the Virginia Wesleyan campus. If you want to do that, here's a link to change your registration. Here's the information for you so that you can register. Then I also looked at, obviously, student organizations. I really put a focus on the NPHC organizations because when we did a deep dive into our data, those students who were not voting or wanting to vote or even registered to vote were our students of color. So I'd rather work with students who, in terms of it, research has shown, individuals who look like each other, they feel more connected. So I worked with the NPHC organizations, the Divine Nine, and they have been fantastic. And when I built my board, I'll talk about that in a little bit, but I made sure I had representation on there. Obviously, athletics, I want to say it's something like 41% of students at Virginia Wesleyan participate in athletics. So again, it's another way to get the coaches, to get them to do this. Off-campus leadership. You can't move forward unless you have the campus leadership helping you. And even if it's only good job, it's better than anything else. Institutional assessment. Natalie touched on assessment earlier. They can help develop measures, but on the flip side, they're the keepers of the NSOL data. They're the ones who, if you need to pull data, and I'll talk about this in a second, but if you want to get a listing of all the students' permanent addresses for everywhere, they're the ones you want to talk with. Other programming offices on campus. We have other centers on campus. So one of them is the center, the Nussbaum Center for Religious Freedom. They do programming, and then every even year, we work with them for the fall programming. They have it focused around civic engagement. 2 years ago, it focused on women in politics. It was a really good sessions, but work with them because they oftentimes have budgets higher that you can pair with. And then finally, advising. So when students come in during the summertime, when they're coming in for orientation, they meet with their advisors. And that's the next thing. They're handed, literally, I create envelopes. In it is a self-addressed stamped envelope that goes right back to the registrar's office. It literally has everything they need, and they hand them to the students. And that way the students can't say, I didn't get anything, but they're getting this, and again, goes with the federal law. Off campus. Because of a lot of our, we've found a lot of our students don't drive. It's very strange. It's shocking to me. But a lot of our first and second year students don't have cars and they don't drive. They don't have driver's licenses, but they want to attend religious service. So they go to the churches that surround. So build the coalitions with them, because they can also, help make you with connections with individuals. But also, again, you're meeting people in the community. And one of the missions, at least for my center, was to go out into the community. And that way I was able to go and help individuals. Nonpartisan orgs, Natalie talked about that. American Association of University Women, the League of Conservation Voters. We would plan, starting with them, in each of them in September, to come in one on Tuesday, one on Thursday, all the way through until the final day of voter registration. Community and neighborhood organizations. We would go meet with them because we want to go into the community. We want to get people to register. If they need to drive to get, or need help getting to the polls, we actually get vans and we will drive them. And then major festivals that go around, we partner with them. We go host a booth for free to get people registered. So we're not contained to the campus. We've bled out into the community on purpose. And that way we're really getting our message out there. If you could move forward, please. So the communication is key. And when we started doing this, at first it was scattershot. It was, oh crap, I got to do that. Oh crap, I got to do that. And so I'm a planner. I try to plan everything out. So I literally sat down, looked at our communication patterns, and started creating templates. I have templates for every type of letter to send. And that way, it's very simple. I can pre-populate the letter. I can program it to send. It will be sent out on a specific day. It decreases your work by doing that. So the emails, one thing we noticed after 2018 was that we had a lot of students who were from out of state that were like, oh, I meant to vote absentee at home. I didn't know how. So I heard that feedback. And what we did in 2020 was, in July, I had institutional assessment run a list of every single student and their permanent home addresses by state. And I would gather all the California kids. And I wrote a letter linking to the California Department of Voting. And I also said, if you want to vote absentee, here's how you do it in California. And then if you want to register to vote in the Commonwealth of Virginia, this is how you do it. The letter also got sent to every student who was doing study abroad. And that went out at the beginning of July. So that way, if they wanted to vote, they could get their stuff in ahead of time, because many of them were leaving in the first week of August. So I wanted to make sure everything got done, but email the students and get them to do that, because that actually, we saw a spike in registrations because they were geared towards our site. We could gauge in terms of that. We have a weekly newsletter that at the, it's usually towards the top. It was usually the 1 or 2, depending on how important things are, about voting. And with all the voter deadlines, the Commonwealth of Virginia votes every 6 months. And so what we wanted to do is keep that in the forefront. Right now, we're gearing up for the primaries. And that's what our message is. After primaries, we then shift and we go right towards doing voting for the fall. We also get information about speakers coming in. And I'll talk about speakers in a second. But in terms of, we want to send that information out about any speaker. We invite every person who is running for office. And sometimes it can go off the rails. It has gone off the rails. If you Google Virginia Wesleyan and Scott Taylor, you will see it went off the rails. But we invite them, and it's open to the public. And our students really do enjoy that, because they're able to go. And by the way, that why it went off the rails had nothing to do with Virginia Wesleyan. It was someone from off campus. Let me be very clear. But we make sure we invite every person. Unfortunately, for the last year and a half, only one party has come to campus, and we have been accused of being not favoring one of the parties. And I have to show tons of emails saying I invited them. Social media. I let my students craft the message. Let me begin by saying that. I can put something up there and I'll be like, it's great. No, it's not. It's not. They speak the language. Let them run it. Granted, I look at it to make sure it's okay, but I work with them to create this plan to send it out. Hootsuite, if it's free, you can do up to, I guess, like 10 free messages, or another form of social media manager. Utilize that. You can constantly do this, and it hits Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. I think they're going to start expanding, but utilize that. But also work with alumni affairs. Engage alumni. That was the other thing we noticed, was that our alumni, after they graduated, they dipped in terms of voting. So what we did was, starting in April, the letters have already started going out, reminding our students, you are graduating soon. Wherever you move to, register to vote. Do it, do it, do it. And then after they graduate, I get their permanent home addresses, and I say, in case you're moving back to Maryland, here's how you register to vote back in Maryland if you are not registered. If you could move forward, please. So like I said, Virginia votes every 6 months. So literally every 6 months, we're reviewing our voter plan, because we want to get feedback for the 6 months we just ended. I get feedback from students, faculty, staff, partners. The plan that we send out, it has been reviewed by students. It's been reviewed by faculty. It's been reviewed by my community partners, because in grad school, I was told, always surround yourself with people who are different than you, because that way you'll take the blinders off. That's why I asked these other individuals. I might think it's a great plan, but my graduating seniors, the only reason why we added that after we saw the data was because one of my students was like, dude, one of my friends just graduated and they're not registered. They just didn't bother to after they graduated. India, that's a great idea. We should tell them about that. Plan your student staff. I try to avoid having seniors on that, because what I want is like junior class president. They're an up-and-coming leader to a senior level. It gives me another year potentially to work with people. I have the SG8 student government, the Black Student Union president, and the MPHC are 4 of my students. I have other students on there, I have additional 3 more on the board, and they cover different areas. I train students throughout the year. And in our center, all students have to go through the training sponsored by the Commonwealth of Virginia, because we register students, and there is an online training. Utilize the state resources. Look for donations, look for grants to drive people to the polls. We run vans. We will go work with the churches in the area to go pick up people who are housebound or don't have cars, to get them to vote early or get them to the polls. So plan those with those individuals, and oftentimes they'll kick in money for gas, and that's really helpful. If you could please move forward. And finally, engagement. So when we're looking at our events, we looked at sporting events. So we look at all the major basketball things. So even people from off campus who are supporting their team get a chance to register to vote with us. Homecoming, Target for our alumni, Parents Weekend, all of those, we run voter engagement. Step shows. Our NPHC is actually larger than our IFC in terms of numbers of organizations. It's about the same in terms of numbers, but they do the step shows. We go to those because it also includes individuals from off campus, including alumni. We also work with off-campus groups who use the campus. So this summer, there is a teaching group coming to campus. We're running a voter ed booth to get people to register to vote, to make sure they are registered to vote for the teachers that are coming onto campus. But we do that with those groups. Off campus, we work with a lot of off-campus groups. We do. We attend programs. We just did Easter services with there's 3 churches right off campus, and they did a walk between all 3. And we were there, and we, at the last one, we're doing voter engagement at an Easter service. Civic leagues, church events, they're always wanting to engage with institutions. They always are. So look for ways to partner with them. These are simple ways to make those connections. You don't have to spend a lot of money on your voter engagement plan. Look for those partners across the board. I do believe that is my last slide. I do believe. If you could advance, please. Yes. So if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
I have to set up the breakout rooms, but now I have this giant window over top of the slide, so I had to move them out of the way so that I could get to my mute button there. Sorry about that, y'all. So great news. I really appreciate that. I think that was some awesome stuff. One of the things we want to do is hear everybody else's great ideas now. So if folks want to click the link in the chat, I'll also send this out to the individual groups, but we have some Jamboards set up. If folks are unfamiliar with Jamboard, when you click on the link, it'll open a page and it's split into 3 boxes. And at the very top, there's this thing that says 1 of 3. And if you click that to the right, you can go to 2 of 3 and 3 of 3 for room 2 and 3. And you'll have your own version of the board. And there's an option on the left-hand bar to either click and create your own new sticky notes. So you can add sticky notes into each of the questions on the board. Or I've already put 1 sticky note saying which room it is on each board as well. And you can always click on the 3 dots in the top corner of a sticky note and say duplicate and just make a new sticky note right on the board, even without going to the toolbar. So hopefully that works for everybody, but I have us set up. We have 3 questions set here for breakout rooms. Kind of sort of what is your institution's commitment to civic engagement? Thinking about some of this grounding, thinking about kind of where we look for those other partners that Brian and Natalie have been talking about, either on or off campus through those commitments, like what other spaces on campus so have even a responsibility or a connection to engaging in civic engagement. And then from there, sort of really thinking like who's part of that CLDE coalition then after beyond that commitment, then who's at the table now? How do you find more of those partners? And then lastly, really exciting, you'll see it's the biggest box on the bottom of the thing, is what are folks most excited to try this year, maybe that you haven't done before. So really excited to see what folks come up with from that, and really happy to get this going. So I will open it up and send it out to everybody. Well, I know we had some quick breakouts there and got to chat about a little bit about some of these things. Excited to see what folks went in there. The Jamboard will stay up, so feel free to keep writing on sticky notes if you want, but did want to just run through a couple more things. I don't know, Rahila, are you able to pull the slides back up? Oh man, thank you so much. If you want to take us to the next one. So just a couple of quick highlights, and folks feel free to jump in, but some things that I had jotted down, kind of looking through what Natalie and Brian had shared before, and just our experience reading campus plans for the last couple of election cycles now is, as people said, I think there's a lot of existing resources now. I linked out to the SLSV library, and I know that ourselves and All In both have resource pages that we keep up, including sample campus plans of different institution types that have been written for past years that we think are pretty high quality. The template document that was talked about by Natalie. There's a lot of, I think, opportunities to kind of jumpstart ahead or just pick through them for new ideas if you've done this before. And then definitely number two, this came up as well, was kind of asking for help. Like, feel free to email us or the All In folks, or, you know, there's networks that are being built out kind of at the state level or in some of these other spaces by institution type, to really be able to try and, again, like, give folks that leg up, help answer those challenges that you might be stuck on, to provide some new ideas, even if you've been at this work for a while and just need a refresh or want to try something new. And then I think, yeah, especially as Brian was saying, like, action plans are living documents in my mind. Like, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Like, I struggle with this sometimes. It's just like, start writing sometimes and you'd be surprised what you get. But then knowing how big institutions are, knowing how many stakeholders there are, having something like that people can contribute to, can review, can look back to. If there is transition, hopefully you inherited a past action plan from someone at least, so that you have maybe a starting point, even if some of that institutional knowledge has been lost, that some of that is still being captured. So I think those were just a couple of highlights I had from sort of listening through and knowing what Natalie and Brian were going to talk about today. The websites are on here, the email addresses for both of our organizations. I see, I think Brian and Natalie both dropped their emails in the chat, which I really appreciate. And like I said, we will send out a recording of this along with the slides, and folks' contact information and some of the key links to some of these external resource pages and hubs and things that were mentioned today, out to folks probably about next week or so. Anything else any of our speakers wanted to share? Anybody want to highlight something they're really excited to try this year before we wrap up for today? Yeah, well, if not, then I will just echo what's in the chat. Real big thank you to Natalie and Brian. I really appreciate both the work you guys have been doing on campus, but also taking the time out of your schedule to share it with all of us today. Huge thanks.